Morning.
Morning. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Kalayim, Perek Zayin, Halacha Beis, and Halacha Gimel. We'll be learning today Daf Samach Gimel. We left off on Daf Samach Beis, Amid Beis, by the last line of the Amid. We are referring back to the end of the Mishnah of Halacha Beis that we had on Daf Samach Beis, in which the Mishnah gives 4 cases as a synopsis, in which, even though we learned in the series of the previous Mishnayos, not just of this chapter, of the past few chapters, that in certain locations one is not allowed to plant foreign seed. However, even if one did, God forbid, violate that rabbinic law, it will not affect an Isur Hana. And then, in contrast to 3 other halachas, where not only is it asr to plant, but if one did so, then yes, the Isur Hana will go into effect. Now, quickly, what are the 4 cases that asurin v'loy mekachin? So the Mishnah said, and I'm going by the Seder of the Mishnah, that moisar chorban hakerem. Guys, remember, chorban hakerem and korachas hakerem means the same thing, because korachas hakerem that we had in the beginning of the 4th chapter is that you already had a planted vineyard, and now after it was planted in a certain way, it was destroyed. It was made bald in its center. That's korachas means bald, and chorban means a churban. It became devastated. So, what is the din of a korachas hakerem, of a chorban hakerem? The din is that even though normally you would think that as long as you distance 4 seed away 4 amas from a vineyard, you're good to go. It's beyond the 4 amas. Nevertheless, if you have this open space that was made after the kerem was planted, the Chachamim, Rabbi will hold you have to have 16 amas of empty space for you to be allowed to plant in the inner 8. Why do I say the inner 8? Because you still need to have 4 amas distance from one side and 4 amas from the other side. That's 4 and 4. And only if you have 16 can you plant in the inner 8. If you have 15, you cannot plant in the inner 7. And if you did, that's what the Mishnah is saying. If you planted within the Dalad Amas, it's Asar Umekach. But if you planted it in that moisad and that excess space of Charban HaKerem, a good try, and leave it up there. Kavan put up a picture of the next case in the Mishnah that we're going to repeat again. The second case that we have in the Seder of the Mishnah is called the Mechoil HaKerem. The Mechoil HaKerem, whoever is looking now at the Zoom, will see the picture of Mechoil HaKerem. Mechoil HaKerem means you have a vineyard, and the vineyard comes to an end, and a person built a wall around the vineyard, and as the Gemara clarified, it doesn't have to be dafka around the entire vineyard, around one side of a vineyard, even if it's just adjacent to 3 vines. That's also the wall that we are referring to. And here again, normally you would say that once the kerem ends, all you need to do is go away 4 amas and plant foreign seed. But since there is a wall at some point after the kerem, and the wall was meant to contain the kerem, you have to have, according to Beis Hillel, a total of 12 amas for you to be allowed to plant. And here again, only in the middle 4. 4 you need to avoid sakerem. And then you have to have 4 empty near the wall. And then if you have the 12 or more, then you can only plant in the middle 4. So here again, what the Mishnah was saying is that what happens if you had 11? If you have 11, you can go 4 amas away from the kerem. No, you can't plant in any of the area. But here, if you did, is asurin v'loy mekachin. The Mishnah really gave another 2 cases, but as we will see in the opening part of our sugya today on Daf Samach Gimel, that there's going to be a link between these 2 cases. A link meaning that whatever type of kerem we are referring to by the din of Charban HaKerem, we want for that same kerem to be a kerem regarding the Mechoil HaKerem, as you'll see when we learn to sugya. Because we want for these 2 to be the same case, where you have both a wall outside of it and there is a opening, devastated area in middle of it. Because of that, we're going to come and we're going to be able to clarify, to take away our kasha. And really, let me just begin. I'll leave the kasha when we start with the Gemara. The opening part will also ultimately lead us to a rule that we learned before, and that is that a kerem katan ein loy mechoil. In other words, this picture that Kevin put up, the second case that we mentioned, I'm saying the second case that we mentioned because when we learned in the last year in the Gemara, evidently the Gemara's girsa in the Mishnah was in the opposite seder. First, the Mishnah mentioned the moisar mechoil hakerem, then the Mishnah mentioned the moisar charban hakerem. It doesn't make a difference vis-a-vis our sugya. The mechoil hakerem, this did that you have to have at least 12 amos to be allowed to plant, as we mentioned in the middle four, is not by a kerem cotton. The din of a kerem cotton is a kerem that only has 2 rows. Of course, even if the rows are big, but even the minimum size that you can have 2 on one row, 3 on the other row. That's the minimum size kerem cotton. You can have a kerem cotton of 2 rows. Each one has 7. It's also called a kerem cotton. A kerem gadol is when you have at least 3 rows, and every row has at least 3. So before we learned the rule that when you only have a kerem cotton, there is no din of a mechoil. That means if a person surrounded the kerem cotton with a wall from one side, from all sides, of course you have to have the 4 amos, la avodas hakerem. But once you have the 4 amos, beyond that you can plant. Period. Our Gemara is going to come to, because of a problem that we're going to address as we'll speak out when we start learning inside, is that what happens if you have a kerem gadol, but it's planted in the same format that you plant a kerem cotton? What does it mean, the format of a kerem cotton? So we have to review another din that we learned in the previous chapters, and that is like this. There is a maximum amount of empty space that one is allowed to leave between the rows in a vineyard, a maximum amount of space, and yet for the rows to be connected. If the rows are not connected, you don't have a din of a kerem, you have a din of a gefen yechidi. So the rule is like this. The Mishnah said, I know we have a Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, Rav Meir and Rabbi Shimon at the end of that Mishnah. We're going with the beginning of the Mishnah, that the rows have to have between them 4 amos, excluding the trees. That was Rab Ze'era. You have to have at least 4 amos, but it has to be under 8 amos. And that's actually the norm format of a kerem cotton, that they planted it like that. It was between 4 and 8. If they went a full 8 or more between one row and the other, they're not connected. But then the Mishnah says that kerem gadol can be under 16 amos. That means even if it's 8 or 9 or 10 or 11, 12, 13, or 15 and a half, they are still connected. The norm format of the kerem gadol was to leave 8, was to leave more than the space you would leave by a kerem cotton. So our Gemara, because of a challenge that we will explain, that we will answer, will come to the conclusion that a kerem gadol that was planted in the format of a kerem cotton. So you had 3 rows or 10 rows. You had 3 rows or more. But you did not give 8, 9, 10 amos of space in between the rows. You didn't do that. You only allowed for there to be 4 amos. Really, it can be up to 8 amos between one row and the other. B'negeya to the din of a mechoil, also ein loy mechoil. The svara we can suggest when we learn it inside. This will be a gavaldik chiddush. I know Yerushalmi is so bekitzer, but it's so beautiful how with a very worded, short shaklavataria, we come to this understanding, and this will resolve a problem that we didn't even speak about yet. Another interesting detail is that even though the Mishnah at the end gave 3 cases where Asad umekadesh, and we are saying something that follows the majority opinion, not everyone's opinion. Asad ve'ena mekadesh is because it's only an Isur D'Rabbanan. Asad umekadesh means it's an Isur D'Oraisa. Let's go with this. However, don't think that if you violated an Isur D'Oraisa by Kalayim, you will always get Malchus. But we will learn today, it's a one-liner, but it's good to know. And Taka, we learned the Rambam. We know this from the Rambam. When are you chayiv Malchus for planting kilei hakerem? Only if you plant a seed of a grape together with 2 other seeds. You have a chartzon and a chita and a seyoira b'mapoil asiyad. when you throw it into the ground that was already plowed, you throw it together. That is where you're going to get malchus. If I'm going to plant a seed, if I'm going to plant like the 3 cases at the end of the Mishnah, where asar umekadosh, you planted a foreign seed within 6 tfachim of a geffen. You planted a foreign seed within 4 amas of a vineyard. You planted the foreign seed under a vine. Asar umekadosh, you're not going to get malchus. Malchus is only when you plant lechatchila, the grape seed, together with 2 other seeds. In other words, a geffen, a chartzon, not a geffen, a chartzon with zeroyim loshanabim bima pleilasya. Okay, that will be the end of halacha base, and then God willing, we're going to start today halacha gimel. Halacha gimel we quoted many times. We quoted the rule. Now that we said that if you plant, let's say I have a vineyard and I neighbor your property, and my vines go over your property, whether that's right or wrong is not negaya now. And you planted under my vine, you planted your wheat. You were not allowed to do it. Whether your wheat becomes asur bahana, yes, after it grew a 200th. Rab Shimon and Rab Yosi, based on their opinion that ein adam mekadosh davar she'eina shaloi, will hold that my grapevine will not become asur bahana. Because you don't have the ability to make us or something that's not yours. Now, when we learned this the first time, many dafim ago, I quoted the Tosfos in Yavamis that points out that even according to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, yes, that say ein adam bekadosh davar she'eina shaloi, don't think it's a hard and fast rule. I'll give you an example where adam will be bekadosh davar she'eina shaloi. The example would be that if I'm going to take your meat, and I'm going to put my milk in your meat, I was not allowed to do that. Now, and it cooked. I'm speaking about the Isur Doiraisa, not just the mix, to be Mavashal Basar B'Challah. A basar from a kosher species, Challah from a kosher species, and Basar B'Challah. Asur Bahana. What do you think? That just because it was your meat is not Asur? Of course your meat is Asur Bahana. So first of all, the one difference will be here, it's physically mixing. Masha Enkin, the example that I gave that we will be speaking about is I am planting my wheat under your vine. They're not mixing. Your vine can be very high up in the ear. It has nothing to do with the nutrient. Not even the nutrients are mixing. Obviously, my wheat has to be beyond 6 tfachim if you have a geffen yechidis. My wheat has to be obviously beyond dalal. We're talking about the isur of me planting under yours, as an example. But I think even ba'avodas hagefen, if I planted it within 4 amas of your kedem, ein adam mekadosh davar she'eina shaloi. The Chachamim argue with that, even though the Mishnah doesn't say Shitas Chachamim, but it's self-understood. Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon. So we're going to begin. Let's see how far we can get. The Gemara is going to quote a Braisa that will give you the source of the Chachamim that hold that yes, Adam could be Mekadosh Davar She'eina Shaloi from the format of the Psukim that we have in Parshas Kisei concerning Kilei HaKedem. That will be today's daf. And coming back over here, guys, remember the first 2 cases of Asurim V'Loi Mekachim, I say Korachas HaKedem, but really the Mishnah calls it Chorban HaKedem. It is the same case, and the Mechoil HaKedem. Now, says the Gemara. Yeah, kid, you wanted to say something?
Just a question. What is Michael? What does it mean, Michael HaKedem?
Passageway. I'll tell you better. Asar HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Mechoil Tzadikim. So actually, let me clarify. Mechoil means a circle. A mechal means you encircled your vineyard, and you encircled your vineyard with a wall. Now that your vineyard is encircled, even though you are beyond the 4 amas, since you are inside the circle, that was the Beis Hillel, you have to have 12 amas. If you have 5 amas, you can say, come on, I have 4 amas, let me plant at the end. And even though we mentioned about planting near the wall, okay, let's say I have 9 amas. So I have 4 amas for my wall. I have 4 amas for my kedem. So was willst du? No, you have to have in the middle 4 amas. Insert, even though it doesn't have to be a circle because we said the wall can only be from one side. Okay. So says, right, the Gemara in the bottom, in the bracket, we're quoting the words in the Mishnah. Moisa Chorban HaKedem, and here the Gemara begins with the Manavshach. The Manavshach. Something doesn't work over here. Something doesn't work is, and then what we're going to focus on is there are two types of keramim. Forget about an oris. Put that aside. Kerem cotton, kerem gadol. Kerem cotton is 2 rows. Doesn't matter how many on each row. Even though to make a kerem, you only have to have shtayim keneged shtayim ba'achas yoytze zanov. Take that picture away, Kevin. You're jumping to the answer. You're ruining my kasha. The kasha is so good that to come to that chap, you got to be a genius. And once you see it, you say, of course. Okay.
My apologies.
It doesn't matter. It's good. So the kerem cotton, remember this. A kerem cotton, of course, could be the minimum of 3 on one and 2 on the other. A kerem cotton can be 1,000 vines in one row, 1,000 vines on the other row. It's called a kerem cotton. It's 2 rows. Kerem gadol is 3 rows with another caveat that we learned a couple of daf ago, that it's not enough for it to be 3-3-2, for example. For you to have a kerem gadol, you have to have 3 rows and minimally 3 in each row. What's the nafkamina, guys, between a kerem cotton and a kerem gadol? We spoke about, we'll just chazer it. That by a kerem cotton, if the space between the rows is 8 amas or more, if it's not under 8, then they don't combine. They do not combine. And therefore, what will be the avoid? There will be avoid of 6 tfachim, and you can plant there lechatchila. By a kerem gadol, the Mishnah said, I know it's not everyone, but we're beginning with the opening part of the Mishnah there, that by kerem gadol, it's under 16 amas. And also to remember, Chevra, that people actually by a kerem gadol would normally, remember that, they would leave 8 amas space, something that they were not allowed to do when they were to plant a kerem cotton. I'll tell you why they would leave 8 amas space, dafka. Because how did we get to the 4 amas, if you remember? We got to 4 amas because when you have a geffen yechidi and you harvest it, this is the balabatish pshat, even though the shiurim are from God, you harvest it on your feet. Even six tvachim is basically 1 amma. 1 amma is for you to walk. You can walk around the vine. When you have a vineyard, you're going to both by the planting and by the harvesting, by the planting and by the plowing, you want oxen. By the harvesting, you want to have a wagon, because when you start taking it off the tree, you don't want to have to hold everything in your hands. You have a lot. So for the oxen and for the wagons, you have to have 4 amas. That's the space needed. Let's say it's around 6 feet. Maybe it's 6 feet and a bit. Makes sense. That's the width of these animals or these utensils. Now, if I have a kerem gadol, I want to be able to harvest 2 rows at the same time. Right? Makes sense. So 4 and 4 is 8. By kerem gadol, they would normally leave the 8 amas or more. By a kerem cotton, they were never allowed to leave. How much would they leave? You can never have less than 4. They would leave the 4 amas. So let's word it that way. So now the Gemara is saying, what type of kerem, manafshach, turning to daf samach gimel, is our Mishnah referring to? And it's such a gavaldik akash. If we're speaking about a kerem gadol, why did the Mishnah have to quote, when it's making its synopsis of the 4 cases, one of which, charban hakerem, asurim, v'loy mekachin, or ve'enom mekachin, why speak about the kerem that was planted and now has this korachas bald spot, this devastated area in the middle, which is charbanoi? Why did we have to speak about that case? So what case should we have spoken about? I'll tell you. And afilu matosoi or matotoi, if that's the way you read it, even regarding a kerem that was lechatchila planted in a certain format, even in a kerem that was lechatchila planted in a certain format, even there's going to be a scenario where it's asurim ve'eno mekach. And now, Pasha, to remember, guys, we learned the sugya on daf lamed zayin on the base, and it's a very small daf inside. We can afford, after many words of introduction, to learn the Pnei Moshe. The Pnei Moshe, for me, was the one that was the most elaborate, and he makes it masu kidvash. Kerem gadol. Says the Pnei Moshe, Top Pnei Moshe. Ibe kerem gadol mighty, which means the definition. Sheish by shayla shurais or yoiser, and the zel nikra kerem gadol. And he's just chazri. B'chol she'einu by elo shtei shurais and nikra kerem katan, as we learned before. Bepered dal halacha gimel or halacha aleph lamed zayin amud beis. And the sugya that we are quoting are actually from Daf Membes. And the kerem gadol. Here we go. The kerem gadol. Narkoi lios natuya yoiser al arba ben ashuris at shmoina ames ben shura l'shura at shmoina ames. At shmoina ames is ad v'lo yad b'chlal. However, What happens if you have 8 amas in between? In other words, what he's trying to say is that by a kerem cotton, Rabbi Mendel, they would keep it to 4. They would keep it to, by kerem gadol, you allow yourself more space. Okay, so just it doesn't mean you're always left 8, but you leave more space. And not only that, you can even go beyond 8. And the Mishnah said it. The Mishnah said, and Afmen Beis Amid Beis, that Hanoiteas Kanamai, even al Shmoina Amis. So we learned at the end that it's mutter. What's that mutter? It doesn't create a kerem. But 1 second, it's not true. It does create a kerem. The Mishnah said under 16. And we had a machlekes amiroim. Aliba de Rav, Bahai Perusha de Mutter, the Rabbi Yosi b'Shem Rav Amar. Mutter means mutter hazera b'di'eved v'asr l'Israel lechatchila. This is very important. In other words, that we guys, we had this. This is all Rabbi Lazar's. The Rabbi Lazar was the one that opened up this whole topic. What happens, guys, when I have a kerem gadol and I left 8 amas or 9 amas, anything between 8 or up until under 16? The Mishnah says it's a kerem gadol. The Gemara implies that you can plant. So the one approach we had in the Gemara was that even though the Mishnah says by a kerem gadol, you can go up until 16, but if it's 8 until 16, then midrabanan you have a kerem. Midrabanan they are combined, and therefore midrabanan you're not allowed to plant within 4 amas. Midrabanan, but midoiraisa it's not connected anymore, and therefore if you planted within 4 amas, the Gemara says clearly mutter means that it's not mekadosh, it's asur ve'ena mekadosh. So we already had a case. You don't have to give me a case where the kerem was devastated in the middle, which is a more limiting case. It's unusual. Why should you have a couple of rows devastated? Here in California, if a fire burnt, the fire would burn the whole thing down. Why up us in the middle? Why would someone uproot a punkt in the middle? It's like, give a better case. Even if we're speaking about a kerem gadol, did we not have, according to the shita of Rabbi Yoina b'Shem Rav on Daf Mem Beis, Daf Mem Gimel Amid Beis, that if you planted a kerem gadol, lechatchila, and there were 8 amas or 9 amas between the rows, the din is that it has a din midrabanan of a kerem gadol, but ve'ena makadosh. Oh, so in other words, we're looking to see why did we dafka give a case of destruction of a chorban. Okay, and the answer is, I'll tell you what the answer is. The answer must be is that we're speaking about a kerem cotton. Why must we be speaking about a kerem cotton? Because we must be speaking about a scenario where they are less than 8 amas apart. Now, once it's less than 8 amas apart, which is a kerem cotton, once it's less than 8 amas apart, then if you plant within dalad amas, asad umekadosh. So the only possibility for you to say that even by a kerem cotton, it's asad ve'ena mekadosh is by korachas hakerem. But hold on, I have a kasha on that. The Gemara doesn't have to say it. We have to say it. Didn't we learn, guys, when we began the 4th chapter, that for korachas hakerem to have a din of korachas hakerem, you have to have, according to the Braisa, minimally a kerem on 2 sides. Remember that whole Braisa? You have a bald spot in the middle of the kerem. It must be in between 2 keramim, even though we were medayik from the Mishnah later that perhaps our Mishnah holds even only from one side, but you for sure have to have a kerem from one side. So here there's a problem. How can our Mishnah be speaking about a kerem cotton, which if you only have 2 rows, if there's a bald spot in the middle of the 2 rows, then you don't have a kerem not here and not there. What would even be the mitzias of having a bald spot in the middle of a kerem cotton? If I have a kerem gadol would mean, let's say I have 7 rows. That we had that before. You have 9 rows. All you need to do is to leave 2 rows in the top, 2 rows in the bottom. In the middle, the bald spot is in between 2 vineyards. If you are in kerem cotton explains, I get it. Kerem cotton can never be planted 8 amas or more. And if it's planted under 8 amas, then asad umekadosh. That's why we have to be speaking about korachas hakerem, chorban hakerem. But what would be the case of kerem cotton? So that's the picture that Kevin put up. So he's telling you, great. He says you can have 2 rows, but like we mentioned, the din of a kerem cotton isn't only because it's 3 and 2. I can have 1,000 on each row, and it's still called a small vineyard because it's only 2 rows. To make our case of Chorban HaKerem, of Korachas HaKerem, B'Kerem Koten, all you need is for each row to have 7. You only have 2 rows, each one facing the other. And like we mentioned, it's between 4 and under 8 amas. So you have the limited space between them. They are connected biblically. And then if you take out the middle 2, you have a bald spot in middle of a kerem to your right and a kerem to your left. Why? Because every kerem has 3 and 3 and 3 and 3. It can even be 3 and 2, but 3 and 3 is avad a kerem cut. So there is a metzias where you can have a korachas kerem in a kerem cut. And that would answer. By kerem cotton, the only time you're going to find a case where asurin ve'eino mekachim is when you have a chorban kerem. But there's another problem. The problem is that a kerem cotton ain't like mechail. Now, the one answer that the Gemara doesn't even give is that the Mishnah really gave 4 cases. The Mishnah gave a case of Moisad Piske Yoris. The Mishnah gave a case of Moisad Apif Yoris. We're not saying that they're all the same case. We could have said it's 2 separate cases. The Moisad Chorban HaKerem, Kerem Kotten. The Moisad of the Mechoil HaKerem is a Kerem Gadol. We could have said it. The Gemara doesn't want to say it. And the Gemara succeeds by not saying it. We're going with the premise that we would prefer for these 2 cases to be the same. But it cannot be the same. Again, the Mimonavsha. If you're giving me a case of a Mechoil, it must have 3 rows. If it has 3 rows, why do we have to only limit the din of Asurim Ve'enim Ekachim to Chorban HaKerem? I'll give you 3 rows that was commonly planted with 8 amas in between or 9 amas in between. And according to the opinion that we quote on the Daf Mem Gimel Amid Beis, Rabbi Yonah B'Shem Rab, all this you see is in Rabbi Lazar over there, is that Asurim Ve'enim Ekachim. Because even by a Kerem Gadol, biblically, it has to be under 8 amas. Once you gave space 8 amas or more, they're not biblically connected. B'chlal, there's no Kerem. It's only Asurim Ve'enim and Asurim Ve'enim Ekachim. That's the Gemara's kash. So the Gemara gives an answer. What's the answer? Ki nan kaimen. What cases I'm speaking about must be a kerem gadol. For there to be a mechoil, it has to be a kerem gadol. But it's speaking about a kerem gadol shenatoi al mate kerem cotton, that it was planted in the arrangement of a kerem cotton, which means that you didn't have 8 amas in between. Didn't have. It had 4 amas in between. Had 5 amas in between. Like a kerem cotton. That's the only case of the Mishnah. You got it? And that's going to work. Says the Gemara, Amar Rab Ze'edon. Now, based on our Gemara's explanation, the Mishnah is really telling us another halacha. And that is that kerem gadol shenatoy shmoina al shmoina eloi mechoil. This is great. In other words, why would the Mishnah limit the case when you planted it with less than 8 amas? You're answering the kasha, but I have a new kasha. The kasha is, why did the Mishnah say Chorban HaKerem? Why wouldn't the Mishnah say a Kerem Gadol? Why wouldn't the Mishnah say it? And then you won't have to limit it to Chorban. What type of case would that be? It would be a case where you had 8 amas in between or 9 amas in between. Why didn't the Mishnah give that case? Because in such a case, there would not be a din of mechoil like it. There would not be a din of mechoil, just like a kerem cotton, ain't like din mechoil. Kerem gadol that was planted, shmoina al shmoina, or more, also ain't like mechoil. So since the Mishnah, who gave the first 2 cases, in whichever order you have it, we wanted to be speaking about the same vineyard, it has to be speaking about a vineyard, can be speaking about a kerem cotton, never has a mechoil. It cannot even be speaking about a kerem gadol that was planted with 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 amas in between, also ein la mechoil. So it must be speaking about a case where you have a kerem gadol that's planted like a kerem cotton, which means that there is lesser, it's not 8, it's less than 8. Oy bazoi, you can't give a case of a normal kerem gadol, because on such a case, if you plant there, within Daladamas, it's also a Mekadosh. The only time where you're going to have also the Eino Mekachim will be like Chorban HaKerem. And indeed, that Tema Mata Sheish Esrei al Sheish Esrei guys, just to know what it means up to. No, it's if the Mishnah is speaking about a Kerem Gadol that was planted Shmoin al Shmoina would mean not only 8 on 8, anything under 16, turning to Daf Samach Gimel Amud Beis, that if we would hold Toy Choy Asur Mekadesh, if that would be the case, because when we learned to Pnei Moshe, the shita that mutar hazer b'diavad v'asal lechatchila is only one opinion. There is another opinion. If our Mishnah would hold of the other opinion, that would be your other answer. What would be the other answer? That why does the Mishnah speak about Chorban HaKerem? Because by a Kerem Gadol, Asur Mekadesh. Asur Mekadesh, then Chutz Aloy Kolchchein. Then Chutz Aloy Kolchchein means, then for sure, if our Mishnah would subscribe to that opinion, that even though there's so much space in between the rows, they are combined, and therefore, if you plant within Dalad Amos Asur Mekadesh, then our Mishnah for sure would have held that if you have a Korachas HaKerem and you don't have the 16 Amos altogether, planting any place in it will be Asur Mekadesh, which is Mamish Gavaldik. Because what are we saying? We're saying that a Kerem Gadol can have until 16 Amos between one row and the other. If that was such a big space, still combines it biblically, that Asur Mekadesh, then if that would be the sheet of our Mishnah would have held that when we learned in the beginning of the 4th chapter that you're not allowed to plant in Korachas HaKerem, I would not say that if you violated, that if you're not allowed to plant unless you have 16 Amos. That means if you have less than 16 Amos, what do you have? You have a proper Kerem Gadol. If you have less than 16 Amos, then it doesn't make sense that our Mishnah would hold that if you planted it beyond 4 Amos from each row, it would ain't Mekadesh. It would be Mekadesh. If biblically under 16 combines the rows, then we wouldn't say that in the Moisar, I know it's beyond 4 Amos, but still, there's less than 16 Amos. For sure, it would be Asur Mekadesh. That's the nail in the hammer. All of this just proves our Mishnah is speaking about a Kerem Gadol. Why a Kerem Gadol? Because the Mishnah wants to give you the case of a Mochel. Kerem Gadol ain't la Mochel. And I'm moida. A Kerem Gadol, if a Kerem Gadol was planted 8 or 9 or 10 Amos apart, it also wouldn't have a Mochel. The only time where a Kerem Gadol has a din of a Mochel is if it's planted like a Kerem Cotton. And therefore, the only Metzias where Asur ve'eino Mekadesh will be Chorban HaKerem in the format that we had in the picture that we showed above. And let's go back. Then the Mishnah gave the final 3 cases. The final 3 cases was Tachas HaGefen, Avodas HaGefen, and Dalad Amos Shebekerem. They're Asur u'Mekadesh. So as we mentioned in the introduction, Asur u'Mekadesh will mean let's go that it means Asur Doiraisa. Not everything that's Asur Doiraisa is going to be something for which you're going to be Chayv Malchus. Chayv Malchus has to be connected to the explicit law in the Torah. And says, Amar Rabbi Yosi, however, Ein loikin ela al ikar kerem. When are you going to get Malchus? Al ikar kerem. What's ikar kerem? Look inside the top Marav folder. Amar Rabbi Yosi amasnisim koi. T'chol eilu de mekachin, taka mekachin. Ein lo Malchus. Ela ikar kerem. V'hainu I zora chartzanim im zeroyim in plural. Ka'achas b'mapaylas yad. In contrast, if first you planted a vineyard, and then you planted in the vineyard, you, the owner, God forbid, you planted a yerek, you planted a tvua, you planted it within a half a hairbreadth. You left still taka mekadesh. It's mekadesh. Aval eino loika ela likar hakerem. And indeed, the Chaim Pasuk Rambam. That's why the Rambam opens up the dinam of Kilei Hakerem. Rambam always quotes the Isur and he quotes a pasuk always. Shenemar, you're going to always see in every Pedic in the beginning of a topic. Sometimes the pasuk comes in halacha beis or gimel, which is rare. But normally, right away, he gives you the lav, he gives you the pasuk, and he opens up by saying, when he chayv malchus, he only speaks about planting it all together. A grapeseed with 2 different zeroyim, gevaldik. So now we're going to move on to what we have as halacha gimel. You can always see that there's so many different girsois, even how to divide the mishnayos. Many people have this as mishnah daled. The whole thing is one text, another text. We're going with halacha gimel. And now let's continue to speak about one of the cases that we just mentioned called tachas hagefen. If foreign seed is planted under a vine, that becomes asur b'hana. What becomes asur b'hana normally? Both should become asur b'hana. Says the Mishnah, hold on. That hamesakech al gafnoi, es gafnoi, al gabe tvuasir shal chaverim. So here, I'm sorry, the case would be, not I didn't mention the right case. It's the same idea. Someone already planted their field with wheat. I am planting my neighboring field, which I own, my vineyard. And I'm allowing for my vines to be extended over. My vines are now extended over your wheat. Hamesakech es gafnai al gabe tvuasir shel chaverei. So, I'm sorry, clearly, the Tanakama holds, First of all, just like my vine will become asur, their seed will become asur. Now we learn details about it. When will mine become asur? When I plant it or when I extend it. We learned that before. Because that's the issue of extending, connected to planting. When the other person already planted him, when he planted, he did everything beheter. What's the problem? That now it's under. That's called he's being makayim. Just remember, a couple of steps. He has to be aware of it. If he's not aware of it, it will not become asur. Not only that, after he becomes aware, he has to make an effort to remove it. But if he doesn't make an effort to remove it, from that moment and on, we make that cheshbon of if it grows a 200th or more, then it becomes asur. That's when it becomes kiddush. Kiddush means it's asur b'hana, it has to be burnt. And now another detail. Now we're going to jump to a little bit of choshen mishpat, which is, if I affected your product to become prohibited, there is a financial damage over here. And indeed, the chayev v'achri yusay, and I have to pay for the hezek that I caused by making your otherwise kosher wheat become asur b'hana. And on this, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon Oimrim, and we quoted him before a couple of times, that not nish tazoi, that ein adam mekadosh davar she'ein shaloi. What will be the status of my grapevine? We're going to learn this in the Gemara. We're focusing now not on my grapevine. We're focusing now on your tvua. That your tvua will not become asur. Why? Because it does not belong to me. And in such a type of isur, I have no physical contact with it. Ein adam mekadosh davar she'ein shaloi. Okay. Now, Amar Rabbi Yossi. Now, Rabbi Yossi is one of the two. When people think about al davar she'ein shaloi, so the easiest case al davar she'ein shaloi then is my neighbors. The commissioner is going to give a greater case. What happens if I have a vineyard or I have a wheat field, and now it's the Shemitah year? The field belongs to me. The vines belong to me. But the product does not belong to me. It's hefker. So on the Shemitah year, the grapes are not mine. So therefore, and he holds ein on the mekadosh shaloi. So Amar Rabbi Yossi, Maisa, that's enjoy your agadate. You had your own vineyard, and you planted in your vineyard. You planted a foreign seed. I know you violated problems with planting. We're not focusing on that. We're focusing now on kalayim. And since during the Shvius, all produce is ownerless, which means the grapes do not belong to the person who planted the foreign seed. According to Rabbi Yossi, what's going to be the din? Rabbi Akiva, who followed this ruling, v'amar, indeed, ein adam mekadosh davar she'ein shaloi. The grapes are hefker, so the grapes are not asur. I want to go more than that. The grains are also not his. I just want to make it clear. Will you be allowed to eat the grain? No. We have to know the din of sfichei shvius. We're going to learn soon Masechta Shvius. Don't worry. Don't forget there's a shvius isur over here. But let's speak about the din of asur b'hana, that the grapes are not asur b'hana because of the rule that ein adam mekadosh davar she'ein shaloi. Great. And now let's at least open up. Let's open up in the Gemara. Shitas Chachamim. The Tanakama ruled clearly that kidesh v'chayev ba'achri yusay. So and it gives you a source. It's almost interesting that why should he need a source? Why shouldn't Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon need a source? But they have to bring a proof. In Parshas Kisei it says, "Loi sizra karmecha koloim." Karmecha, a focus on the line of chav, the komats, your vineyard l'chaydas mashma. That God is saying, maybe that's why Rabbi Shimon doesn't even need a pasuk. Don't plant kerem. Karmecha means it's yours. For you to answer it, it has to be yours. Indeed. So you would take a think, karmecha. Kerem achar minayin. Oh. So Talmud Loimer, now you have to know how to read. Talmud Loimer kalayim. Now what's the raya from kalayim? There's different approaches. You can see that in the parentheses, the girsa that we don't have is that it doesn't say kerem, singular plural. We're including something. That's not the way we're going to learn. We're going to learn like this. The Torah could have said, or perhaps should have said, if you subscribe to the opinion of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, the Torah should have said, Lo sizra kelayim b'karmecha. And that would better mirror the other isur, if I'm not mistaken, of not planting kilei zeroim. The fact that the Torah doesn't say leisizra kalayim b'karmecha, it says in the other order leisizra b'karmecha would have been enough. Don't plant b'karmecha. Kalayim means not only if it's a b'karmecha. For that, Tizra means don't plant foreign seed. That's it. It says the words karmecha before kalayim. Kalayim becomes superfluous. Let's go that way. So the word kalayim now comes to include even if it's not yours. Even if it's not yours. Now the Gemara is going to be medayik in the words of the Braisa. The Braisa didn't say Eili ela karmecha kerem chaveiroi minayin. Guys, what would chaveiroi mean? Chaveiroi is chaveiroi b'mitzvos. Chaveiroi means ayid. The words of the Braisa is, look how the Gemara is being medayik b'kitzur. It says kerem acher. What does acher refer to? Even a non-Jew. No, it's a given that not only am I able, according to the Chachamim, to render the grapes of someone else's field, kalayim, if I plant my zera in your kerem, will I make mine becomes usher because I planted miyad? We learned that above in the Mishnah. Yours, mikayim. You have to know. You have to choose not to uproot it. It has to grow, but ultimately it will become kalayim. But we're saying kerem achet. So says Amar Rabbi Lazar the Amoira that who was the author of this Bryce? It must be the Rabbi Meir. He's turning to Daf Samach Daled Amadal, and that's all based on Rav Meir Shita. That Rav Meir Amar ein kinyan. The Eretz ein legoy kinyan the Eretz Yisrael lepatrim in hamaisnes. In other words, if you would not subscribe to the shita of Rabbi Meir, midoy raisa kalayim is only the Eretz Yisrael, and if the guy owns kalayim, we're presuming it means he owns the land now, and still I can make it. It can only go with ein legoy kinyan Eretz Yisrael. That is.
What if he's renting? What if he's leasing?
Very good. So Amar Rabbi Yechanan, who was really Rabbi Lazar's teacher, that is Chaver, right? Rabbi Lazar was like a Talmud Chaver. No. It came in a better case. He bought the whole thing. No, let's go that the Yesh King in Legoy Beretz Yisrael Patrim and Amaisis. Because there's no Kedusha. If there's no Kedusha, then there's no Isur Dairais of Kalayim. Still, Divrei Hakoli. Why? What will be in a case that Goy, he owned a vineyard, Shezara Karmai, Kilayim, he owned the vineyard. The Goy planted wheat in the vineyard. He planted in the vineyard. And then he went and he sold the whole thing to a Yid. Now the Jew, the buyer, may not maintain that Kalayim in a field that belongs now to a Jew. So if in the what are you going to say? Oh, it was planted by a Goy. That's why the B'rai said Dafka didn't say Kerem Chaveroi, Kerem Achet. Even in such a case, L'divrei Hakol, if it'll be Mekayim it, they'll make it also. I'm sorry, what did you say, Akir?
I am actually sorry. Not become. not to kill the discussion, but it's still why bekarmecha? Why not bakerem? Not is that the karmecha stands still standing still.
I know. Well, you are a nitzuz of the neshama of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. That's his deal. It's always that way. You know, whenever you have two tanoim that are arguing on psukim, what does one do with the pasuk of the other? The Babli works all of this out inside. We're not doing that inside. We're so mekatzet. Even this kalayim, tamalim kalayim. Everything is mekitzet. If you
Can I ask you a question?
Huh?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Are we assuming that if the land is owned by a non-Jew and it's really his, then climb is not an issue at all?
No, it's a Isser Midrabban. It's a Isser Midrabban. It's a Isser Midrabban and not Doiraisa. Clearly, yes. If Yesh Kinyan La'akum, the Eretz Yisrael, La'afkiya, La'poitrei, Min HaMaisres, because he takes away the Kedusha, then Midoiraisa, there would be no Isser of Kalayim.
So outside of Eretz Yisrael, for sure, it doesn't matter Jew or non-Jew. We're saying that it's the Rabbanon.
And therefore, Eino Mekadosh. And our whole topic is also Mekadosh, so it's Doiraisa.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in Eretz Yisrael becomes this whole distinction as to whether he is actually owning the land, so to speak, or not, because that would determine. Got it. Okay,
and one thing we also just do chazer that even according to the other Tanoim who hold that Yesh King and Legoy Eretz Yisrael Apotrim and Amaistis, the moment a Jew buys that land, it gets upgraded again. That's why it's such a big mitzvah to buy land. If I'm not mistaken, you can buy land on Eretz Yisrael on Shabbos.
Shabbos, yeah.
Even though normally in Midrabanan you might write, we don't care. In other words, it's that important for Jews to own land in the whole